My name is Sarah, and I worked as a park ranger at Shawnee National Forest in southern Illinois for about 8 years before I transferred out. I loved that job more than anything, being outdoors, helping visitors, protecting the wilderness. But there's one incident that still keeps me up at night, and it's the reason I requested that transfer. It was late October, right when the fall colors were at their peak. We'd get tons of hikers during that time, and part of my job was doing trail maintenance and checking on some of the more remote camping areas. There's this one section of the forest that doesn't get much traffic, about 7 miles from the nearest road, accessible only by a narrow, poorly marked trail. We called it the Back Hollow. I was doing a routine check, making sure the trail markers were still up, and that nobody had set up any illegal camps. The forest was beautiful that day. Leaves crunching under my boots, that crisp autumn smell in the air. I was about 4 miles in when I noticed something off the trail. At first I thought it was just a rock formation, but as I got closer, I realized it was the entrance to a small cave, maybe 5 feet high. Now, caves aren't unusual in that area, but this one had something that made me stop cold. There was a wooden door built into the entrance. Not just some boards leaning against the opening, but an actual door with hinges and a handle. Someone had gone through considerable effort to install it. I should have radioed it in right then. That's protocol. But curiosity got the better of me. I called out, identifying myself as a park ranger, asking if anyone was there. No response. I tried the handle and the door swung open easily. The smell that hit me was overwhelming. It was a mixture of body odor, rotting food, and something else I couldn't quite place. Something chemical. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The cave opened up into a larger chamber, maybe 15 feet across. What I saw made my blood run cold. Someone had been living there, and not just camping. This was a home. There was a sleeping bag on a makeshift bed frame, shelves carved into the rock walls lined with canned goods and supplies, a small camping stove, and dozens of water jugs. But that's not what scared me. Covering every available surface were photographs. Hundreds of them. They were all of people hiking in the forest, and I recognized the locations. These were all taken on trails in our section of Shawnee. But here's what made it truly terrifying. These weren't casual nature photos. They were all taken from a distance, with a zoom lens, and the subjects had no idea they were being photographed. Some were of families with children, some were of solo hikers, some were of couples. And they were organized by date, going back at least 3 years. My hand was shaking as I moved my flashlight around the cave. That's when I saw the calendar on the wall. Certain dates were marked with red X's. I pulled out my phone to take pictures for evidence, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps outside the cave. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I killed my flashlight immediately and pressed myself against the cave wall. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was outside would hear it. The footsteps stopped right at the entrance. I could see a shadow blocking the dim light from outside. Then I heard breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing. A voice called out, low and calm. "I know you're in there, Ranger. I saw your truck at the trailhead." I didn't respond. Every instinct told me to stay silent. The breathing continued for what felt like an eternity. Then the voice spoke again. "You shouldn't have come here. This is my place. My home." I heard him step inside the cave. I could make out his silhouette now. He was tall, maybe 6'3" or 6'4", wearing heavy layers of clothing despite the mild weather. I reached for my radio slowly, trying not to make any noise, but my hand bumped against the cave wall. Just a slight sound, but enough. The silhouette turned toward me instantly. "There you are." I did the only thing I could think of. I turned on my flashlight directly at his face and ran. I don't remember much of what he looked like, just wild, tangled hair and eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. I hit him with my shoulder as I ran past, and I heard him stumble and curse. I ran down that trail faster than I'd ever run in my life. I was radioing for backup, screaming into it as I ran. Branches were hitting my face, and my lungs were burning, but I didn't stop. I could hear him behind me for the first quarter mile, his heavy footsteps and labored breathing, but eventually the sounds faded. I made it back to my truck and locked myself inside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. When backup arrived about 20 minutes later, I led them back to the cave with 4 other rangers and 2 sheriff's deputies. The cave was empty, the door was gone. The photographs were gone. The supplies were gone. Everything. The only evidence that anyone had been there at all was some disturbed dirt on the cave floor and the faint smell that I remembered. We searched for 3 days and found nothing. No trace of the man, no campsite, nothing. But here's what really haunts me. 2 weeks later, I was reviewing some of the old missing person reports for the area. We'd had 7 people go missing in Shawnee over the past 5 years. All of them were solo hikers. All of them disappeared without a trace. I pulled up the calendar on my phone and compared the dates they went missing to the red X's I'd seen on that calendar in the cave. Every single one matched. I requested my transfer the next day. The investigation is still technically open, but they never found him. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, in some other cave, in some other forest. And sometimes, late at night, I think about all those photographs and wonder how many of those people in them made it home safely. Story 2. The repeating trail. This happened when I was working at Olympic National Park in Washington. My name is Marcus, and I'd been a ranger there for about 3 years when this incident occurred. Olympic is massive, over 1,400 square miles of wilderness, and some parts of it are so remote that you can hike for days without seeing another person. In late August, we got a call from a worried wife saying her husband hadn't returned from a solo backpacking trip. He was supposed to be gone for 4 days, and it had been 6. His name was Derek Chen, 34 years old, experienced hiker. He'd filed a route plan with us, which was smart, so we knew where to start looking. I was part of the search and rescue team that went out. We followed his planned route, which took him through the Ho Rainforest and up toward the Seven Lakes Basin. Beautiful area, but dense. The canopy is so thick in places that it's like walking through a green tunnel. We found his car at the trailhead, which was expected. We started hiking his route, calling out his name every few minutes. We were about 7 miles in when we found his first campsite. Everything was still there. Tent, sleeping bag, backpack, food, everything. It looked like he'd just stepped away for a moment and planned to come back. His wallet was in the tent with all his cards and cash still inside. That's when we knew something was seriously wrong. Nobody abandons their gear like that, especially not an experienced hiker. We radioed back to base and expanded the search. More rangers came out, and we started doing a grid pattern around the campsite. I was the one who found the first note. It was about 100 yards from his camp, stuck on a tree branch at eye level. It was written on a page torn from a journal in Derek's handwriting. We confirmed that later with his wife. The note just said, "The trail keeps repeating. I've passed this same tree 4 times, going to try heading directly west." That was strange, but not unheard of. People get disoriented in the forest all the time, especially in areas without clear landmarks. But then we found another note, 1/4 mile further west. This one said, "Still seeing the same markers. This doesn't make sense. The compass must be broken. It's getting dark. We'll camp here and reassess in the morning." But there was no camp. We searched the entire area and found nothing but that note. We kept following the direction he'd indicated in his notes. Third note, another 1/4 mile west. Something is wrong with this forest. I've been walking for 6 hours straight and I keep ending up at the same tree. Not a tree that looks similar. The same tree. I carved my initials in it the first time. They're always there. This isn't possible. The handwriting on this note was more frantic. The letters larger and more erratic. We kept searching and found a 4th note. "I'm not alone. I can hear footsteps matching mine. When I stop, they stop. When I walk, they walk. But there's nobody there. I'm leaving my pack. Going to try to run." We found his backpack, about 50 yards from where the note was. It was open and things were scattered around like he'd grabbed what he thought he needed and abandoned the rest. We found a 5th note, but this one wasn't on a tree. It was on the ground, weighed down by a rock. The handwriting was barely legible. The footsteps are getting closer. I can see something moving in the trees, but every time I look directly at it, it's gone. I don't think I'm getting out of here. If someone finds this, tell Amy I love her. Don't come looking for me at night. Whatever is here, it's more active when the sun goes down. It was starting to get dark by the time we found that note. We'd been searching for almost 8 hours. The team leader made the call to set up camp and continue in the morning. Standard procedure. Nobody wanted to spend the night out there after reading those notes, but we didn't have a choice. We set up camp in a clearing and posted watches throughout the night. I had the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. shift. Everything was quiet for the first hour. Then around 3 a.m., I heard it. Footsteps in the forest. Not animal footsteps. Human footsteps. Steady, rhythmic, like someone walking with purpose. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound. Nothing. The footsteps stopped. I called out, identifying myself as a park ranger, asking if anyone was there. No response. I woke up my team leader and told him what I'd heard. We both listened, and after a few minutes, the footsteps started again, this time circling our camp. We woke everyone up and we all heard it. Footsteps moving around our camp in a perfect circle, maybe 30 yards out, just beyond where our flashlights could reach. This went on for 20 minutes. Then it stopped. Just sudden, complete silence. Nobody slept after that. As soon as the sun started to rise, we packed up and continued the search. We found Derek about a mile from where we'd camped. I wish I could say we found him alive, but we didn't. He was sitting against a tree, facing back toward the direction of his original campsite. Here's the part that still doesn't make sense. According to the GPS data we compiled from tracking his notes, Derek had walked in almost a perfect circle, roughly 2.5 miles in diameter, over and over again for 3 days. His body was less than half a mile from his original campsite. He should have been able to see it, or at least recognize the area, but according to his notes, he thought he was miles away. The medical examiner said he died of exposure and dehydration, but they found something else. His compass, which he'd mentioned being broken, was working perfectly fine. His GPS device, which he'd also had with him, was fully functional and fully charged. Both devices would have led him directly back to his camp. In his final journal entry, which we found in his jacket pocket, he wrote, "I understand now. The forest doesn't want me to leave. Every path leads back to the beginning. The footsteps are right behind me now. I can feel breath on my neck, but when I turn around, there's nothing. I'm so tired. I just want to sleep. Amy, I'm sorry. Tell Mom and Dad I love them. To whoever finds this, don't try to make sense of it. Some places don't follow the rules we think they do." We closed the case as death by exposure due to disorientation. But I've been back to that area of the forest dozens of times since then, and I've never been able to shake the feeling that something is off about it. The trees seem to bend in strange ways. Sounds echo in directions they shouldn't. And twice I've had the distinct feeling of someone walking behind me, matching my pace step for step. Both times when I turned around, there was nothing there. I don't take solo trips into that part of the park anymore, and I always make sure I'm out before dark. Story 3, The Burned Cabin. I'm telling this story anonymously because I technically broke protocol, and I could still face consequences. I was working at Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington State. This happened 3 winters ago, during one of the worst snowstorms the region had seen in decades. I was posted at a small ranger station on the eastern edge of the forest. It was just me and another ranger, a guy named Tom, who'd been doing this for 20 years. The storm hit on a Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning, we had almost 2 feet of snow with more coming down. We got a distress call around noon Thursday from a family of 4 who'd gotten their SUV stuck on one of the forest roads about 5 miles from our station. They had 2 young kids with them, and they were starting to panic because the temperature was dropping fast. Tom and I geared up and took the snowmobiles out to get them. We found them easily enough and got them back to the station safely. The problem was the storm was getting worse, and there was no way they were driving out anytime soon. We told them they'd have to wait it out with us, which they weren't thrilled about, but they didn't have much choice. By Thursday evening, the power went out. We had a backup generator, but we needed to conserve fuel, so we were only running it for heat and essential equipment. We settled in for what we thought would be a long, boring night. Around 9 p.m., we saw flashlights through the window. Someone was approaching the station through the storm, Tom and I looked at each other in confusion. Nobody should have been out in this weather. We opened the door and found two people, a man and a woman, both in their 60s, covered in snow and shaking from cold. We got them inside immediately. They were borderline hypothermic. The man could barely speak at first. We wrapped them in blankets, got them warm drinks, and waited for them to recover enough to tell us what happened. The man's name was Robert, and the woman was his wife, Linda. They told us they'd been staying at a cabin about 3 miles west of the station. It was a rental cabin, one of those rustic places that some people own and rent out to tourists. They'd been there for 2 days when the storm hit. According to Robert, something had happened at the cabin that night. He was having trouble explaining it clearly, and Linda was just crying and wouldn't talk at all. Finally, Robert managed to tell us that they'd heard sounds coming from the basement of the cabin. Scraping sounds, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. The cabin didn't have a basement, according to the rental listing. Robert had gone down to check, and he said the basement door, which he swore hadn't been there before, was at the end of a hallway. When he opened it, he found stairs leading down into darkness. He called down, thinking maybe there was a maintenance issue or an animal had gotten in. Something called back. Not words, just a sound that he described as like someone trying to imitate a human voice, but not quite getting it right. He slammed the door shut, and he and Linda grabbed what they could and ran out into the storm. They'd been walking for almost 2 hours before they saw our lights. Tom and I exchanged glances. It sounded crazy, but these people were genuinely terrified, and they'd risked death by exposure to get away from that cabin. Tom got on the radio to call the local sheriff's office, but the storm was interfering with the signal. We couldn't get through. He tried the satellite phone next, but that wasn't working either. We were completely cut off. The family we'd rescued earlier was listening to all of this, and the mother was getting increasingly upset. The kids were scared. It was turning into a situation. I made a decision. I told Tom I was going to snowmobile out to the cabin to check it out. I thought maybe there was someone else who needed help. Or maybe Robert and Linda had just been experiencing carbon monoxide poisoning or something. Tom didn't like it, but he agreed it was worth checking. I took one of the snowmobiles and headed out. Robert had given me directions to the cabin. It was slow going in the storm. Visibility was terrible, but I had a GPS and I was familiar with the area. It took me about 40 minutes to find it. The cabin was small, maybe 800 square feet, sitting in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. There was smoke coming from the chimney. Not a lot, just a thin trail. I parked the snowmobile and approached the front door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and called out, identifying myself as a park ranger. No response. I stepped inside. The interior was warm and I could see a fire dying in the fireplace. The cabin was one large room with a loft bedroom, a kitchen area, and a sitting area. Everything looked normal. Rustic furniture, some decorations on the walls, nothing unusual. I checked the loft. Nothing up there but a bed and some personal belongings, presumably Robert and Linda's. I was starting to think they'd just panicked over nothing when I saw it. At the back of the cabin, behind a door that I'd assumed was a closet, was a hallway. A hallway that shouldn't have been there based on the cabin's external dimensions. The cabin wasn't big enough for a hallway. I walked down it slowly, my hand on my radio, even though I knew it wouldn't work. At the end of the hallway was a door. It was old, the wood was dark and warped, and it didn't match any of the other doors in the cabin. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I opened it and found stairs leading down into the darkness. The smell that came up was horrible. It was like rot and mold and something else. Something chemical and wrong. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it down the stairs. They went down about 15 feet to a dirt floor. I know I should have left right then. Every instinct was telling me to get out of that cabin. But I'm a park ranger, and part of my job is to help people. And I kept thinking that maybe someone was down there and needed help. So I started down the stairs. The basement was bigger than the cabin. That doesn't make sense, I know, but that's what it was. The flashlight beam didn't reach the far walls. I could see shapes in the darkness, but I couldn't make out what they were. I took another step down. That's when I heard it. The same sound Robert had described. Something trying to sound human, but not quite succeeding. It came from the far end of the basement, echoing off the walls. "Hello?" it said, but the word was stretched out. Too many syllables, the pitch all wrong. I backed up the stairs immediately. "Hello?" he said again, and I could hear movement in the darkness, something coming toward the stairs. I reached the top, slammed the door shut, and ran. I didn't stop until I was back on the snowmobile. I got back to the station and told Tom everything. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but he could see I was shaken. We agreed not to say anything to the others that night. We'd deal with it in the morning when the storm cleared. But here's the thing. The next morning, when the storm finally broke and we were able to establish communication again, we reported the cabin's location to the sheriff's office. They sent deputies out there. They found the cabin. It was completely burned to the ground. The fire was cold, like it had been burned for weeks or months. There was no sign of any recent fire, no smell of smoke, nothing. The rental company said the cabin had burned down 2 years prior and had never been rebuilt. They'd taken it off their listing after the fire, but I was there. I saw it standing. I went inside. I went down those stairs. Tom and I never talked about it after that. Robert and Linda left as soon as the roads cleared, and we never heard from them again. I put in for a transfer about 6 months later. I still work for the Park Service, but I'm at a different location now, somewhere with less forest and more open space. Sometimes I think about what I heard in that basement, that voice trying to sound human. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd gone all the way down those stairs. I'm glad I didn't find out. Story 4, The Midnight Hiker. My name is Jennifer, and this story takes place at Cuyahoga Valley National Park in Ohio. It's not one of the big famous parks, but it's beautiful, especially in the fall. I'd been working there for about 5 years when this happened. It was October mid-month, right in peak fall color season. We'd had a busy day with visitors, and I was doing a late patrol to make sure everyone had cleared out before the park officially closed for the night. Most of the trails close at sunset, and it's my job to make sure nobody's camping illegally or causing problems. I was driving one of the main park roads when I saw a figure walking along the shoulder. It was about 10 p.m., well past closing time. The figure was dressed for hiking, wearing a backpack and boots, walking at a steady pace. I slowed down and pulled alongside, rolling down my window. "Excuse me, sir, the park is closed," I called out. The figure stopped and turned toward me. It was a man, probably in his 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked completely normal, which somehow made what happened next even more disturbing. "I'm aware," he said calmly, "but I need to finish my hike." I explained that he'd have to leave and come back tomorrow during open hours. He just stared at me for a moment, then asked, "What time is it?" I checked my dashboard. "It's 10:07. "Good," he said. "I still have time." "Time for what?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just turned and continued walking. I parked my vehicle and got out, following him on foot. "Sir, I need you to leave the park. If you don't comply, I'll have to cite you for trespassing." He stopped the walking and turned to face me again. "You don't understand. I have to complete this hike by midnight. If I don't, something bad will happen." The way he said it made my skin crawl. He wasn't being aggressive or hostile. He was just stating a fact, like telling me the sky is blue. "What will happen?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I've been having the same dream for 3 weeks. Every night I dream that I'm hiking this exact trail, and I have to reach the end by midnight. In the dream, if I don't make it, something catches me, something in the trees. Every night the dream gets more vivid, more real. Last night I felt it touch my shoulder. When I woke up this morning, there were bruises on my shoulder in the shape of handprints." He pulled down his collar and showed me. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see dark purple bruises on his shoulder. They did look like handprints, but bigger than human hands with long fingers. "So tonight I decided to actually do the hike," he continued. "To see if it makes the dream stop. I need to finish it, please." I should have called for backup right then. This guy was either mentally ill or on drugs, and either way he needed help. But something about the fear in his eyes made me hesitate. He genuinely believed what he was telling me. "Oh, What trail are you hiking?" I asked. "The Ledges Trail. I started at the Ledges Overlook Trailhead at 8:30. It's a 2.2-mile loop. I should be able to finish by midnight if you let me continue." The Ledges Trail. I knew it well. It was one of the more popular trails in the park. winding through some interesting rock formations and forests. Nothing particularly unusual about it, except for some old local legends about the area being used for Native American ceremonies centuries ago. Against my better judgment, I made a decision. I'll escort you, I said. But if anything seems off, we're leaving immediately, and I'm calling the sheriff. He nodded, accepting this, and we started walking. I radioed back to the station and told them what I was doing, leaving out the weird parts of his story. I just said I was escorting a hiker who'd lost track of time back to his vehicle. We walked in silence for the first 10 minutes. The forest at night is a different place than during the day. Sounds carry differently. Shadows move in ways that make your eyes play tricks on you. I kept my flashlight on and my hand near my radio. "Thank you for doing this," he said eventually. "I know it sounds crazy." "It does," I agreed. "Have you considered seeing a doctor about these dreams?" "I have an appointment scheduled for Monday, but tonight I just needed to see if this would work." We continued hiking. The trail wound through the forest, passing the rock formations that gave the ledge's trail its name. Massive slabs of rock, some over 20 feet tall, worn smooth by centuries of weather. In the daylight, they're beautiful. At night, they're imposing and almost threatening. We were about halfway through the loop when the man stopped suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I listened. At first, I heard nothing but the usual night sounds. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps, but not quite right. They didn't have the rhythm of a person walking. It was more like something hopping or loping. "It's probably just a deer," I said, but I didn't believe it. I'd heard plenty of deer in the forest at night. This wasn't a deer. The footsteps continued, keeping pace with us, staying just out of sight in the trees. The man had gone pale. "It's here," he whispered, just like in the dream. "Keep walking," I said, my hand on my radio now. "Just keep moving." We picked up our pace. The footsteps matched us. Then we heard another sound. Breathing. Heavy, raspy breathing that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The man was nearly running now, and I was right behind him. My flashlight beam danced crazily across the trail as we moved. We rounded a corner and came face to face with something. I say something because I can't accurately describe what I saw. It was tall, at least 7 feet, standing in the middle of the trail. It had the basic shape of a person, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, reaching almost to the ground. The head was misshapen, larger on one side than the other. The man froze. I grabbed his arm, pulling him backward. The thing took a step toward us, and that's when I got a better look at it in my flashlight beam. It wasn't solid. I could see through it like looking through smoke or fog, but its eyes were solid. They glowed with a dull red light. I pulled my service weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't do any good. "Back away slowly," I told the man. We started backing up, keeping our eyes on the thing. It matched our pace, following us, but not closing the distance. Then it spoke. The same voice the man had described from his dreams, trying to sound human, but failing. "You're late," it said, the words stretched out and distorted. "The sun has set, the time has passed. You are mine now." The man was shaking. "No," he said, "I still have time. It's not midnight yet." The thing laughed, and it was the most horrible sound I've ever heard, like glass breaking mixed with screams. "Time means nothing here," it said. "You came to the woods at night. You entered my domain. The dream was a warning. You should have stayed away." That's when I remembered something. The ledge's trail, according to local legend, had been a site for various ceremonies. But there was another story, one that fewer people knew about. In the 1800s, a man had gone mad and murdered his family near these rock formations. He'd claimed that something in the woods had told him to do it. He was hanged for the murders, but according to the story, he'd cursed the woods with his final breath, saying that the thing that had driven him mad would remain there forever, claiming anyone who entered the forest after dark. I'd always thought it was just a story, a local legend, to make the park seem more interesting, but now, facing this thing on the trail, I wasn't so sure. "Run," I told the man. "When I say go, we run back the way we came." "It won't work. the man said, his voice hollow. "In the dream, I always try to run. It always catches me." "This isn't a dream," I said, though I was starting to wonder if that was true. "On three, 1, 2, 3, we ran. Behind us, I heard the thing give chase, those wrong-sounding footsteps pounding on the trail. The man was faster than I expected, fear giving him speed. We ran past the rock formations, ducked under low branches, jumped over roots. The thing was right behind us, so close I could hear that awful breathing. We burst out of the tree line and into the parking area where I'd left my vehicle. The motion sensor lights came on, flooding the area with bright white light. I looked back and saw the thing at the edge of the trees. It stopped at the boundary between forest and clearing, as if there was an invisible barrier it couldn't cross. We got into my vehicle and I drove away fast, not stopping until we were out of the park entirely. I took the man to the nearest hospital, told them he was experiencing a mental health crisis, and left. I wrote up a report that night, leaving out everything that I'd seen and heard. I said I'd escorted a hiker out of the park after hours, and that was it. The man, whose name I learned was David Martinez, was evaluated at the hospital and released the next morning. They found nothing physically wrong with him beyond exhaustion and mild hypothermia. The bruises on his shoulder were real, but the doctors couldn't explain them. I never saw David again, but I did some digging afterward. I found out that the dreams had stopped after that night. He never had them again. But 3 other people over the past 10 years had reported similar dreams about hiking the Ledges Trail at night. 2 of them had actually attempted the hike, just like David. Neither of them made it to the end of the trail. Their bodies were found days later, dead from exposure, even though the weather had been mild. Both bodies had bruising around their necks in the shape of large handprints. I requested a transfer 6 months later. I still work as a park ranger, but I'm at a different location now, and I never, ever patrol trails at night anymore. Some rules exist for good reasons, and park closing times are there for more than just liability protection. Story 5. The Empty Campground. This is Greg, and I worked at Yellowstone National Park for 12 years. Yellowstone is massive, over 2.2 million acres, and it's one of the busiest parks in the country. During peak season, we'd have tens of thousands of visitors every single day. The summer I'm going to tell you about was my 7th year there. It was late July, right in the middle of the busiest time of year. All of our campgrounds were completely full, with waiting lists for cancellations. We had 12 developed campgrounds in the park, and every single site in every single one of them was occupied, or so we thought. I was doing routine checks of the Madison campground, which has about 280 sites spread across a large area near the Madison River. Beautiful spot, very popular. I was driving through making sure everyone was following the rules, no illegal fires, food stored properly, that sort of thing. I was about halfway through the campground when I noticed something strange. There was a section, maybe 30 or 40 sites, that appeared to be completely empty. No tents, no RVs, no vehicles, nothing. This was weird because, according to our reservation system, every single one of those sites was occupied and paid for. I stopped my truck and got out to investigate. I walked through the empty section, checking site numbers against my clipboard. Site 127 reserved and paid for. Empty. Site 128 reserved and paid for. Empty. Same with 129, 130, 131, and so on. All of them were supposed to be full, but there was nobody there. I radioed back to the station and explained the situation. They pulled up the reservation system and confirmed that yes, all of those sites were showing as occupied. They'd all been checked in by the gate staff. People had shown their confirmation emails, paid their fees, and been given their site assignments. But somehow, none of them had actually set up camp. This didn't make any sense. We had a waiting list of hundreds of people trying to get campsites. Why would people go through the trouble of reserving, paying for, and checking into sites, only to not use them? My supervisor, Carol, came out to the campground to see for herself. We walked through the empty section together. That's when we started noticing other details. The picnic tables at these sites were covered in dust, like they hadn't been used or cleaned in weeks. The fire rings were full of old, cold ash, not fresh like they would be if someone had used them recently. The area felt abandoned, forgotten. Carol made the decision to check with the gate staff. She called them on the radio and asked them to pull up the check-in records for those specific sites. There was a long pause. Then the gate staff came back on and said something that made my skin crawl. "According to our system, nobody has checked into those sites." "That's impossible," Carol said. "The reservation system shows them as occupied." "I'm looking at the check-in log right now," the gate staff responded. "Those site numbers aren't here. According to this, those sites haven't been checked into all season." Carol and I looked at each other. "Pull up the names of who reserved them," Carol said into the radio. Another long pause. That's really strange. All of the reservations for those sites are under the same name. All of them. About 40 reservations, all made by someone named Thomas Everett. We ran the name through our system. Thomas Everett had made his first reservation in late May, just before the season started. Then he'd made another one 2 days later, then another. Over the course of 2 months, he'd reserved every single site in that section of the campground, spending thousands of dollars. But here's what really got us. When we looked up his payment information, the credit card had been declined every single time. Every single time. But somehow, the reservations had still gone through and showed as paid in our system. "This has to be a system glitch," Carol said. "We'll contact IT and get it sorted out." But it wasn't a system glitch. ET confirmed that the reservations were real. The transactions had been processed, but the money had never actually transferred. It was like the reservations existed in the system, but not in reality. We decided to manually mark those sites as available and started checking people in from the waiting list. The first family we assigned to, Site 127, set up their tent and seemed fine. We checked on them an hour later, and they were sitting at their picnic table eating lunch. The next morning, they were gone. Not just packed up and left, gone. Their tent was still there, zipped shut. Their car was still parked at the site. Their food was still sitting on the picnic table. But the family was nowhere to be found. We searched the entire campground. We called their names. We checked the bathroom facilities, the nearby trails, the river. Nothing. 4 people, 2 adults and 2 children, had vanished without a trace. Their phones were still in their tent, wallets, keys, everything. They'd just disappeared. Carol immediately called in law enforcement rangers and the FBI. This was now a missing persons case times 4. They searched for 3 days. Search dogs, helicopters, divers in the river. They found absolutely nothing. Then the family just reappeared. 3 days later, they walked back into their campsite like nothing had happened. They had no memory of where they'd been. The last thing they remembered was eating dinner at the picnic table. Then they woke up, walking back into their campsite 3 days later. They were medically evaluated and found to be physically fine, just severely dehydrated and malnourished, consistent with not eating or drinking for 3 days. But they had no injuries, no signs of being restrained or held against their will. They just couldn't remember anything. Carol made the decision to close that entire section of the campground for the rest of the season. Officially, it was for maintenance and infrastructure upgrades. Unofficially, we were terrified to put anyone else in those sites. I started doing some research into the history of that area. Turns out in the 1920s, before it was officially part of the national park, that section of land had been used as a camp by a religious group. Not mainstream religious, but some kind of fringe sect that believed in sacred geometry and ley lines and spiritual energy. They'd stayed there for an entire summer, performing ceremonies and rituals. According to newspaper articles from the time, the group had suddenly abandoned the camp overnight, leaving all their belongings behind. Local authorities found the camp empty, but with signs that people had been living there recently. Fires were still warm, food was still on tables, but all 70 members of the group were gone. They were found 3 days later, walking down a road about 50 miles away. None of them had any memory of how they got there or where they'd been. Several of them were never quite right after that, developing psychological issues and paranoia. The group disbanded within a year. The newspaper article included a quote from the group's leader before he disappeared into an asylum. He said they'd opened a door they couldn't close and that the land was hungry. I showed the articles to Carol. She read them in silence, then looked at me and said, "This doesn't leave this office. We can't have people thinking Yellowstone is haunted. It'll destroy tourism." The section stayed closed for the rest of that season and the next one. Then, quietly, it was reopened. To my knowledge, nothing else weird has happened there. But I transferred to a different post before I could find out for sure. Sometimes I check the reservation system for those sites, and every now and then I see a reservation under the name Thomas Everett. The credit card always declines. The reservation always goes through anyway. And every time it happens, I call the ranger station at Madison and tell them to keep an eye on those sites. Story 6. The Photographer. My name is Chris, and this happened at Acadia National Park in Maine. I'd been working there for about 4 years when I met Michael Reeves. He was a professional photographer who came to the park every fall to shoot the foliage. Nice guy, early 50s, very passionate about his work. He'd been coming to Acadia for over a decade and knew the park as well as any of the rangers did. That October, he checked in at the visitor center and told me he was planning to camp at one of the backcountry sites for a week to get some shots of the sunrise over Cadillac Mountain. He had all the proper permits, knew what he was doing, and I didn't have any concerns about him. We chatted for a few minutes about the best spots for photography, and then he headed out. 4 days into his trip, he came hiking back into the visitor center at full speed without his gear, looking absolutely terrified. His face was pale, and he was breathing hard like he'd been running. I immediately went to help him and get him some water. "There's something wrong with my photos," he said, his hands shaking as he pulled out his camera. "All of them. Every single one I've taken this week." He showed me the camera's display screen and started clicking through his photos. They were beautiful shots, typical Acadia scenery. Ocean views, mountain peaks, forests ablaze with fall colors. I didn't see anything wrong with them at first. "Look closer," he said, zooming in on one of the photos. "In the background, do you see it?" I looked where he was pointing. In the tree line barely visible in the shadows was what looked like a figure. A person standing among the trees, partially obscured. "Could be a hiker," I said. "That's what I thought too," Michael said. "But look at this one." He showed me another photo, taken at a completely different location on a different day. The same figure was in the background, in the same position relative to the camera, even though the background was completely different. He clicked through more photos. Every single one had the figure in it. Same position, same distance from the camera, always partially hidden in shadows or behind trees or rocks. But the figure's position in the frame stayed exactly the same no matter where Michael had taken the photo or what direction he was facing. "It's in every photo I've taken this week," Michael said. "Every single one. Even the ones I took inside my tent." He showed me a photo of his camping stove and cooking supplies. In the upper right corner of the frame, barely visible at the edge of the tent fabric, was the same figure. Same position, same distance. "That's really strange," I admitted. "Could be a camera malfunction, maybe something on the lens or sensor." "I thought that too," Michael said. "So I tried my backup camera, same thing. Then I tried my phone, same thing." He pulled out his phone and showed me. Every photo on his phone from the past 4 days had the same figure in it. I didn't know what to tell him. It didn't make any physical sense. A malfunction on one camera maybe, but all 3 devices? "There's more," Michael said. "Last night I was in my tent reviewing photos on my laptop. I have a bigger screen so I can see more detail. I zoomed way in on the figure as far as the resolution would let me, and I could see its face." He pulled up the photos on his laptop and showed me. The figure had a face, but it wasn't quite right. The features were slightly too large, the proportions slightly off. And it was smiling. Not a friendly smile, but something wider and more disturbing. "That's when I packed up and hiked out," Michael said. "I left half my gear there. I don't care. I'm not going back." I told him to stay at the visitor center while I called my supervisor. This was beyond weird, and I wanted someone else's opinion. While I was on the phone, Michael suddenly yelled from the other room, "It's here! It's in the parking lot!" I ran back and he was looking out the window. "What? What's where?" "The figure. I just saw it walk past the window." I looked outside. The parking lot was empty except for cars. There was nobody walking around. "I don't see anyone," I said. "Take a photo," Michael said, his voice panicked. "Take a photo of the parking lot with your phone." I thought he was losing it, but I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the parking lot through the window. When I looked at the photo, my blood ran cold. The figure was there, in the same position relative to the camera, standing in the middle of the parking lot. But when I looked with my eyes, there was nothing there. Michael saw my expression. "You see it now, don't you?" I took several more photos from different angles. The figure appeared in every one, always in the same position relative to the camera. It was like it existed only in photographs, not in reality. My supervisor arrived and we showed him everything. He was skeptical at first until he took photos with his own phone and got the same results. We ended up calling in a paranormal investigation team from the university. Yes, really, we were that desperate for an explanation. They came out 2 days later and did a full investigation. They took hundreds of photos, used thermal cameras, EMF detectors, the whole 9 yards. The figure showed up in every single photograph anyone took anywhere in the park. But only in photos. You couldn't see it with the naked eye. Here's where it gets even stranger. The investigation team looked at photos taken by other visitors to the park over the past week. Regular tourists, people who had no connection to Michael or his experience. The figure was in their photos too. Thousands of photos taken by hundreds of different people all over the park, and the figure appeared in every single one. But nobody had noticed it. People were so focused on what they were photographing, the beautiful scenery, that they hadn't paid attention to the backgrounds of their images. The figure was always there, always in the shadows, always partially hidden, but always in the exact same position relative to the camera. The investigation team couldn't explain it. They ruled out camera malfunctions, lens artifacts, digital glitches. Whatever this was, it was appearing in analog cameras, digital cameras, phone cameras, everything. It defied explanation. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. A week after Michael's first report, the figure stopped appearing in photos. People took pictures all over the park, and there was nothing unusual in them. Whatever it was had been there for exactly 2 weeks, and then it was gone. Michael never came back to Acadia. He told me later that he'd developed a severe phobia of cameras and photography. He sold all his equipment and changed careers entirely. The whole experience had broken something in him. As for me, I still work at Acadia, but I don't take many photos anymore. And when I do, I'm very careful to check the backgrounds. Because sometimes, maybe once every few months, I'll see something in the shadows of my photos that looks familiar. That same figure, same position, same unsettling smile. It's never there when I look with my eyes, only in the photos. I've stopped showing people when it happens. What would I say? That something that only exists in photographs has been stalking me for years? Nobody would believe me. But I know what I see. And I know that somewhere, just at the edge of perception, something is watching us. Something that we can only see through a lens. Story 7, The Visitor Who Never Left. This is Amanda, and I worked at Grand Canyon National Park for 6 years. The Grand Canyon is one of the most visited parks in the country, with millions of people every year. With that many visitors, you get used to dealing with all kinds of situations. Lost hikers, medical emergencies, people doing stupid things for photos. But this situation was different. It started on a Tuesday in March, off-season, so the park was quieter than usual but still busy. I was working at the South Rim Visitor Center when an elderly woman approached the information desk. She looked to be in her 70s, well-dressed, with white hair and kind eyes. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for my husband. We got separated and I can't find him." This happens all the time. The park is huge and it's easy for people to lose track of each other. "Of course," I said. "What's his name?" "Harold Pritchard," she said. "We were walking along the rim trail and I stopped to take a photo. When I turned around, he was gone." I got her description of Harold and radioed to other rangers to keep an eye out. tall, thin, wearing a blue jacket and khaki pants. Should be easy to spot. I told the woman, whose name was Eleanor, to wait at the visitor center in case he came back looking for her. An hour passed. No sign of Harold. I walked the rim trail myself, asking other visitors if they'd seen him. Nobody had. Eleanor was getting increasingly worried. That's when she told me something that made the situation more urgent. "Harold has dementia," she said quietly. "He's usually fine, very lucid, but sometimes he gets confused. If he wandered off, he might not remember where he is or how to get back." We escalated the search. More rangers got involved. We checked all the main viewpoints, the parking lots, the shuttle stops. Nothing. It was like Harold had vanished into thin air. By evening, we'd expanded the search to include trails leading down into the canyon. This was concerning because a confused person wandering onto those trails could easily get lost or injured. We had search and rescue teams hiking the main trails, calling Harold's name. Eleanor stayed at the visitor center, refusing to leave in case Harold came back. I sat with her, trying to keep her calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "He wouldn't just wander off," she kept saying. "Even when he's confused, he knows to stay close to me." The search continued through the night with no results. By morning, we had search dogs, a helicopter, and volunteers combing the area. Eleanor had spent the night in a chair at the visitor center, barely sleeping. That's when things got weird. Around 9 a.m., a family came to the information desk. "There's a man sleeping on a bench near the rim," they reported. "We tried to wake him, but he won't respond. We think he might need medical attention." I radioed for emergency services and ran to the location they'd indicated. There, on a bench overlooking the canyon, was Harold Pritchard. He was sitting upright, eyes closed, hands folded in his lap, perfectly still. He looked like he was just taking a nap. "Harold?" I said, shaking his shoulder gently. "Mr. Pritchard?" He didn't respond. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. I started CPR while waiting for emergency services to arrive, but I already knew it was too late. Harold Pritchard was dead. The paramedics confirmed it. They said he'd likely been dead for several hours, possibly since the previous afternoon. That's when I realized something that made no sense. This bench was along a heavily trafficked section of the rim trail. Hundreds of people would have walked past it in the time Harold had been sitting there. Why hadn't anyone reported it until now? I asked the family who'd reported it. "Did you walk past this bench yesterday?" "Yes," the father said, "several times. We walked this section of trail at least 4 or 5 times yesterday. The bench was empty every time. He definitely wasn't there." But according to the medical examiner's initial assessment, Harold had been dead since approximately 3 p.m. the previous day. He should have been on that bench the entire time. Yet nobody had seen him until this morning. I had to tell Eleanor. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. She took it quietly, just nodding and asking if she could see him. I escorted her to where Harold was. She stood looking at him for a long moment, then said something that has haunted me ever since. "He's still waiting for me to finish taking my photo." The official cause of death was a heart attack. Natural causes, quick and painless. Eleanor made arrangements to transport Harold's body home, and that should have been the end of it. A sad but not unusual situation. People die in national parks sometimes. It happens. But here's what I can't explain. After Eleanor left, I was reviewing security camera footage from the visitor center, part of our standard procedure for any incident. I was watching the footage from the previous day, around the time Harold and Eleanor had arrived. I saw them enter the visitor center together. I saw Eleanor approach the information desk to ask for a map, and I saw them leave together to walk the rim trail. But then I kept watching. About 10 minutes after they left, I saw Harold walk back into the visitor center, alone. He walked slowly through the lobby, looking around like he was searching for something. Then he walked back out. I fast-forwarded through the footage. Harold appeared again an hour later, then 2 hours after that, then again. Throughout the entire afternoon and evening, while we were searching for him, Harold appeared on the security cameras walking into and out of the visitor center. Every time he looked confused, wandering around the lobby before leaving. I checked the timestamps. Some of these appearances were after the medical examiner had determined he was already dead. I showed the footage to my supervisor. We watched it together in silence. "Camera malfunction," he finally said. "Has to be. Maybe a glitch that's showing old footage mixed with current footage." But the timestamps were correct. The other people in the footage were different each time, matching other security cameras and visitor logs. The footage was real and current. Somehow Harold Pritchard had been dead on a bench and simultaneously walking around the visitor center for hours after his death. I pulled footage from other cameras around the park. Harold appeared on dozens of them, walking along trails, standing at viewpoints, sitting on benches. Always alone, always looking lost and confused. And all of these appearances were time-stamped after he died. The last appearance was at 8:47 a.m. on the day his body was found. 17 hours after his death, security cameras captured Harold walking along the rim trail toward the bench where his body was sitting. The footage shows him approaching the bench, standing in front of it, looking down at his own body. Then the footage glitches for a second, and when it clears, Harold is gone. Only his body remains on the bench. 30 seconds later, the family who reported it walked by and discovered him for the first time. I compiled all of this footage into a report, but it was never officially filed. My supervisor told me to delete it. "Camera malfunctions, data corruption, something technical," he said. "We can't have reports of ghosts in the park. Can you imagine what that would do to tourism?" But I kept a copy of the footage on a personal drive. I've watched it hundreds of times over the years. I've tried to find rational explanations. Camera glitches, data errors, timestamp problems. Nothing fits. The footage is clear, consistent across multiple cameras, and cannot be explained by any technical malfunction. Harold Pritchard died of a heart attack at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday in March. But for the next 17 hours, he continued to wander Grand Canyon National Park, searching for his wife, confused and lost, unable to find his way back. When he finally found himself sitting on that bench, he was able to rest. I left Grand Canyon 2 years after this happened. I still work for the Park Service, but at a different location now. Sometimes I wonder how many other people are wandering parks, confused and lost, visible only on camera feeds that get dismissed as glitches. How many visitors have never really left? I don't watch security camera footage anymore if I can help it, because sometimes, late at night when I'm closing up the visitor center, I'll see movement on the monitors, figures walking through empty lobbies, standing at viewpoints long after the park is closed. When I check in person, there's never anyone there. But on the cameras, they're still walking, still searching, still waiting to finish whatever brought them to the park in the first place. Story 8, the radio transmission. This is my last story and the reason I'm retiring from the Park Service entirely. My name is Robert, and this happened at Denali National Park in Alaska. It was my final assignment, supposed to be a peaceful way to end my career. Instead, it became something I'll never fully understand. Denali is remote, really remote. 6 million acres of wilderness, most of it inaccessible by road. When you're out in the backcountry, you're truly isolated. Your radio is your lifeline to civilization. In September, late in the season, a solo hiker named David Warren filed a backcountry permit for a 2-week trek into the interior. Experienced guy, former military, knew what he was doing. His route would take him deep into the park, far from any trails or established camps. He checked in via radio as required on days 1, 3, and 5. Everything was fine. Weather was good, no problems. But on day 7, he missed his check-in. That wasn't necessarily alarming. Radios malfunction. Batteries die. Sometimes you're in a location where you can't get a signal. But on day 8, we received a radio transmission. It was David's voice, but something was wrong. The transmission was broken, filled with static, and what we could hear was disturbing. Something following me, not an animal, keeps pace exactly. When I stop, it stops, and when I move, it moves. Always the same distance behind. Can't see it clearly. The transmission cut out. We tried to respond, but got no answer. We immediately organized a search party. David's last known position was about 40 miles from the nearest road in some of the most rugged terrain in the park. It took us 2 days to reach the area where he should have been. We found his camp, tent still standing, gear all present. But no David. His sleeping bag was laid out like he'd just gotten up. His stove had a pot on it, with freeze-dried food still inside, rehydrated but uneaten, like he'd prepared a meal and then left before eating it. We found his radio. It was still on, batteries at full charge. Nothing wrong with it. Next to it was his journal. The last entry was from the night before. Day 7. Something is wrong. I keep hearing my own footsteps echoing, but delayed by exactly 2 seconds. When I walk, I hear my boots on the ground, then 2 seconds later, I hear the exact same sound again. I've stopped multiple times to listen. The echo continues for exactly 2 steps after I stop, then silence. Tonight, I set up my tent and made dinner. While I was eating, I heard the sound of my tent being set up again. The exact same sounds, the same sequence. Poles sliding together, stakes being hammered, zipper being pulled. All of it delayed by exactly 2 seconds. I'm scared to fall asleep. I'm scared I'll hear myself sleeping. That was the last entry. We searched the area for 3 more days. Search dogs couldn't pick up a scent trail beyond the campsite. It was like David had simply ceased to exist. On the 4th day of searching, we received another radio transmission. Same frequency, same call sign, David's voice. Day 10, still following. I've seen it now. It looks exactly like me, wearing my clothes, carrying my pack. But the movements are wrong, delayed by 2 seconds. Everything it does, I did 2 seconds ago. We tried to respond, but got only static. We triangulated the signal. It was coming from deeper in the wilderness, about 10 miles from his camp. We changed our search direction and headed toward the signal. That night, while we were camped, every ranger in the search party had the same experience. We all heard sounds from just outside our tents. Sounds of our own movements, delayed by exactly 2 seconds. When we moved inside our tents, we heard those same movements from outside. Zippers, rustling fabric, breathing. All of it perfectly mimicking what we were doing, but 2 seconds behind. Nobody slept that night. In the morning, we found footprints around our camp. Each ranger's footprints were duplicated, one set from the ranger walking around during their watch, and a second identical set, perfectly overlapping, but pressed slightly deeper into the ground. We received one more transmission that day. It's getting closer. The delay is shorter now. Only 1 second. I can see it clearly. It's me. Exactly me. Same scars, same everything. But its eyes. Its eyes are empty. Please send help. I don't think we can both exist. The transmission ended with a sound that I'll never forget. It was a voice, but impossible to describe. Like 2 identical voices speaking the exact same words at the exact same time, but one slightly out of sync with the other, creating a horrible warbling effect. Then silence. We never received another transmission from David. We found him 2 days later, and he was sitting against a tree, his radio in his hand, but dead. The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death. No injuries, no signs of exposure or illness. His heart had just stopped. But here's what I can't explain. Next to David's body was another body, identical to David. Same clothes, same gear, same scars, even the same serial numbers on his equipment. The second body was in the same position, leaning against the same tree. Both bodies were equally decomposed, suggesting they died at the same time. When we reported this, we were told to transport both bodies out separately and not discuss it with anyone. The second body was quietly cremated and the whole incident was classified. Officially, David Warren died of cardiac arrest while on a solo hiking trip. There was no mention of a second body. I helped carry both bodies out of the wilderness. I had to look at David's face, then look at the identical face on the second body. I had nightmares for months afterward. After we got back, I started experiencing something strange. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear my own sounds delayed by 2 seconds. Footsteps, breathing, the rustle of clothing. It happens randomly, maybe once a month. It lasts for a few minutes, then stops. The last time it happened was 2 weeks ago. The delay was shorter, only 1 second now. I'm retiring at the end of this month. I'm leaving Alaska, I don't know what happened to David Warren in that wilderness. I don't know what he encountered or what he became. But I know that some places in the world operate by different rules. Places where the normal laws of reality don't quite apply. Denali is one of those places, and I think somewhere deep in that 6 million acres of wilderness, David Warren is still out there. Both versions of him, walking 2 seconds apart, forever trying to catch up with himself, forever falling behind. And I'm terrified that whatever happened to him is slowly starting to happen to me. That's why I'm done. 32 years as a park ranger, and I'm walking away because I'm scared of my own echo.